We are going to get started. So good evening. I am Bill Brown, the Director of New Faith Expressions for the Baltimore-Washington Conference. And along with my colleague, Reverend Dr. Rodney Smothers, who is the Director of Leadership and Congregational Development, we love presenting our Training Tuesday here for the Baltimore-Washington Conference. Our presenter tonight is Dr. Scheherazade Forman. She is the Dean of Student Success and Engagement at Prince George's Community College. She is also the pastor at Violetville United Methodist Church in the Baltimore Metropolitan District. It has been my joy to be able to get to know Dr. Forman over the last couple of weeks, and I'm excited that she is here with us tonight. A couple of technical notes you will want to be aware of as we get started tonight. Please have your chat box open. There will be some time this evening where questions will be asked. You'll be able to interact through the chat. We'll turn the chat on for those opportunities. If you have a question for Dr. Forman, please use the Q&A feature, and we'll get to questions at the end of her presentation. Also, tonight's presentation is being recorded and will be available on the conference website later this week. And the slides that we will be showing tonight will also be available on the conference website when the recording is ready. So without further ado, we're going to open with a word of prayer and then let our presenter begin. So if you would pray with me, please. Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks. We thank you that we are gathered together tonight, even though we may seem disconnected. Although we are all in our individual spaces, we are in this virtual place tonight to learn and to grow, to interact and to engage with an important topic. So I give you thanks for the availability of Dr. Forman and her knowledge and wisdom that she brings to tonight's topic. I thank you for the attendees who are with us tonight and pray that your spirit would be upon all of us to give us insight, wisdom, and understanding in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
Now, one thing I like to say is we bring in people from all over the country. If people remember, a couple weeks ago, we were dialed in with Dr. Douglas Strong, and he was over on the West Coast. And today, Dr. Forman is gracious enough to be with family in the middle of an undisclosed location. I won't say where, but she's with family, but has been willing to be with us tonight. So thank you so very much for coming and being with us tonight. I'm going to turn off my video and launch your PowerPoint and let you go.
Okay. So good evening. Good evening. Thank you, Bill, for the introduction. In addition to what it is that Bill shared about what I do, I currently have the highest concentration of grant administration in one area at the college that I serve as dean at. And so even if I didn't want to admit it, these years of experience in grant administration has also had me writing as well. And so I figured that I could share some of my experiences. And so here we are this evening. So just so you know, the agenda, I did want to have a moment of introductions, try to at least bring some semblance of being together. So if you could in the chat, let me know why you're here or what you hope to learn. That would be great. And I'm going to see if I can see that, if anyone is actually going to respond. That's if you care to share that. So while you're doing that, I'll also let you know what else we plan to do this evening. I'll talk a little bit about getting started, tips and guidelines, basic proposal sections. I do have a few sites that I located to show you what search resources look like, and just a little talk about grant management. And of course, then a time for Q&A. Okay, Ophelia, writing a proposal, beginning to write a proposal. We will make sure that we cover that. Okay, so far that's the only thing I see in the chat, so we'll just keep moving. So you want to write a grant. You want to receive a grant. And so what you need to do is become familiar with the requirements for the grant you're interested in. There are many methods and there are many requirements. And so what you will hear me say repeatedly is that you need to follow the instructions that are given and to stay focused on what's being asked of you and not what you think they need to know. That is going to be very important in the process because the methods and the requirements are going to vary. That is a given, but you need to be sure that you are paying attention to what is being required, what is being asked of you. Locating funders can be time consuming. When we get to the slide with some sample resources, those took me a little while to find. Unless you're a part of a listserv or a part of an organization that sends you a regular bulletins or announcements about grants, it will be something that you have to seek and find, and it can be time consuming. One of the things that I like to do is to alert my circle of colleagues or friends that I'm looking for grants so that they can keep their eyes and ears open. And if by chance they come across something, they can shoot me an email, they can send it to me, and we can go from there. You want to be clear of your strengths and where you need assistance. I cannot stress that enough. If you need someone to proof your writing when you're done, then have someone lined up to proof the document when you're done. If you need someone to help you with the numbers, crunching the numbers, then please have someone on standby as a part of the team. What I will tell you is that the best grant writing in the beginning is done in a team fashion. It's done when you have multiple sets of eyes and different strengths around the table or in the Zoom box or at the computer, so that you can have the best that you could possibly provide. The other thing that I want you to know is that there are government grants they are the grantor, and then there are private funds for grants. And the requirements for each is different. When you look at community grants, that's usually a private, nonprofit sponsored, sometimes for profit, but it's private. The government, on the other hand, those grantors are usually very clear about what it is they want, how they want it, whereas a private grantor may be a little more liberal, may give concession to some other things. And so you really want to know who is providing you the money and what the expectation is. When you are trying to determine if you really want a grant from that entity, you should research the background of the grantor. What is their mission? Does their mission align with what you do, with what you seek to do? What are their funding priorities? Do they even fund what it is that you need to have provided? What are their expectations? Do they want quarterly reports? Do they want a monthly report? Do they want to meet with you periodically? What is it that the grantor wants from you? If you decide midstream that the funds you allocated for one thing are not in line with where you're going, are they easy to move money around? Or if they said it is spent on this item and this item alone, you're stuck. You want to be able to know those types of things. You want to know why the issue is important. Many times when you are asking for money from a grantor, they want to know, have you assessed the need? Is this something that you just have as a wonderful idea, or is there really a need? And you have to be mindful that data is important. Not a guess, not an estimation, data. Next slide, please. So the stages of grant writing. The first stage is researching. You really want to know those things that I just shared. You want to know that the grantor supports what it is that you need to accomplish. Then you actually complete the application. All applications are different. There are some semblances. There's some things that are similar, and I'm going to go over that a little later. But an application for one grant may not be an application for another grant. There will be some components that are usually seen in all levels of grant writing, but you want to be sure that you have what you need when you're ready to start the application process. Once you submit the application, then you are awarded or you're denied the award. At that point, you want to make sure that you've set your vision, that you're communicating with the grantor, as well as those that are going to help you to implement the grant. And then there is the implementation phase. Some grants are 1 year. Some grants can be a cycle. A cycle can be 2, 3, 5 years. You want to be sure that a part of what you have noted and that you are keeping track of are all milestones and all deadlines. You want to make sure that you're keeping track of all milestones and all deadlines. If it is a complicated grant, you may need some type of project management tool, some type of tracking tool. But if you are like most, a word chart, an Excel spreadsheet will do just fine. You just want to make sure that you are keeping track of what you said you would do and what you've been able to do. So if I could give you any tips, any guidelines, they would be what I have on this slide. I cannot stress enough to begin early. On a regular basis in my profession, as well as the work I do in the community, I will get an email and I know that they mean me no harm and they're excited and they'll say, I found this grant, it's really wonderful and it's due in a week. That's not realistic. To gather information, to be able to put all the components of the application together. So you want to be able to begin early. Now, how can you get around that? If you have in place some of the components of a grant that you maintain, so the executive summary, do you have the information about your organization? Are you keeping the statistics current? Then you may be able to pull off a short timeline. But in normal circumstances, you may not. You want to be able to apply early. Some grants you're mailing in, some you're dropping off, some you may actually have to use a database and submit electronically. You do not want to wait until the last minute. The system has gone down. You wait till the last minute and we're thankful for being able to mail items, but there have been some delays. You want to be sure that you're not at the last moment trying to get something that is this important off and you don't have enough time. You want to be able to reapply if you had an unsuccessful submission. And that may sound strange, but if you think that that is a good fit, that those funds could be used well, and that your organization would do a wonderful job, then reapply. Tweak what was stated as needing to be edited, bolstered, whatever the comments were. You want to make sure that you reapply if you have not been awarded, if you believe that that was something that would benefit your organization. You want to follow the directions. And if you have a question, please ask it. One of the things that my team and I have had the experience with is call each other, send each other emails saying, what do you think they're really saying? Or do you think this is really the answer? And sometimes we just stop and say, let's call and ask them. And 9 times out of 10, that gets you to what you need, and then you're able to move on. So you want to be able to follow the instructions, the directions that you've been given. Another tip is you need to know that you have the ability, that you're capable, that you're knowledgeable, that you have a vision, and stick with it. Everyone had a first time writing a grant. Everyone usually continues to be better, to hone that skill. So you want to be able to just stick with it, do your best, and you just add on to it. It's no different than anything else that you do in life. The first time you set out, it may not be the best, but the next time you do it, it gets better, and it gets better and better and better. But while you're doing all of that, be specific and be realistic. Be specific and be realistic. Next slide, please. So these are some of the basic sections of a grant proposal. These are not the only sections. Let me say that again. These are not the only sections, but these are some of the basic sections. Most grants are going to ask for a cover letter. The cover letter is something that you can keep as a template, and you could probably use over again, because that would include some of the basic information about your organization. And so the cover letter is a basic section of the grant. The executive summary, that is also a basic section in a grant proposal. So you want to be sure that your executive summary is succinct, that it speaks to what you plan to do, what it is that they've said they can fund. And you want to make sure that the executive summary speaks to each of the items that it needs to. You want to be clear about the statement of the problem. That's why when I said data, data, data in an earlier slide, you need to be able to accurately state the problem. You don't want to, just because you've seen it a certain way or someone has told you it was a certain thing, to include that as quote unquote the gospel. You want to be able to state a problem and have some data to back it up. The project design is something that is usually asked for because they want to be sure that you have a plan for spending the money. It is a sad time when you are awarded funds and then it's time for a mid-year report and you haven't spent the funds. So the project design allows for you to take and provide yourself and the grantor with those milestones, those deadlines, those points where there should have been action, there should be movement, and you want to be able to have something as a roadmap for the spending of these funds. You want to make sure that you have objectives. And so the objectives may not be the goals of the project. They may look a little different than your goals. In some cases, they may be similar to your goals, but you want to make sure that you know that the grant is successful if you've completed A, B, and C. You want to have purchased the wood, built the house, and sold the house. You want to make sure that each of those components have been done, measured, tracked. And then there is always the assessment. You have to be able to assess if you are meeting the need and if you are going to make the end goal. There is always a budget. There are usually parameters for how the money can be spent. And so if there are parameters for how the money can be spent, you want to make sure that you're staying within those parameters. And if you ever want to make a change to what you submitted, there's usually some type of an adjustment process. And that is something that you would need to know from the grantor. So these are some sample grant searches. What I found was from the state of Maryland. I found some from Maryland Nonprofit, from Maryland Philanthropy. I believe if you click on one of those, Bill, do you think we can click on one just to see what? And if not, that's okay. I've
clicked on it. Hold on.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So this is an example of the grants page from the state of Maryland. And so you can see the organization, the title of the grant. And so this is what I was talking about when I said you need to research, and it can be time consuming because if you look at the organization, okay, Pepsi Cola is awarding a grant and it's about recycling, but what about recycling? So you'd want to go and read the summary. And so many of those links on this page have a page that looks like this. You click on there and there's going to be multiple opportunities. There's 850 entries on this particular site. So when I say that it can be time consuming, I am not exaggerating. It can be time consuming. And so you want to be sure that you're taking the time to actually see what it is that may be needed. There are also some names that are well known in terms of providing opportunities for grants. And so some of those are listed. I didn't have the actual website, but the Ford Foundation, the Gates Foundation, NIH, those are all places where there are funds that are available. So this particular page is a good place to begin your search, and this will be made available to you. Various foundations do award based on their mission. So I know that when I first started paying attention to the way that some buildings were named and that a specific foundation may have paid for it, I thought, wow, they have all of that in common, and not necessarily that they have a population in common, but maybe it's that the mission they have in common, which is why you may find them in multiple places. So you want to be sure that you take the time, you start early, you look at all the specifics and see what's out there that could help you with the work that you're doing. So grant management. This is probably, on the job training, this is probably the fastest, quickest lesson that I had to learn, was, okay, I get the grant, now what? It's great. You can celebrate, I was awarded this grant, but now what? You want to be able at the end of that grant cycle, whatever it is, to be able to say that you did it well. You want to be able to say that you were a good steward of those funds and that you were able to meet the expectations. But the forward visionary also says, when these funds are gone, how do I sustain this? How do I keep this going? That should be a part of the thought process when you begin writing the grant. You probably have other things that you wanted out of this, but from my perspective, that's one of the greatest gifts I can give you. Grant management, sustainability. I don't know how many times I've had colleagues who have been awarded a grant. They were awarded a nice amount of money for a cycle, not just a year, for a cycle. When the cycle was over, everything went away. That's not good. That's not good. You should along the way be trying to figure out how can we sustain it. Grant management includes reports. I've mentioned monthly reports, quarterly reports, end of the year reports. All of those are a thing in grant management. And all of them will look different based on the grantor and the type of grant that you have. Grant management includes tracking that budget. So whether you want to use QuickBooks, an Excel spreadsheet, some hash marks on a piece of paper, a graph piece of paper, you need to be able to keep track of the budget and of any other report that is necessary to fulfill the grant. And you want to be able to evaluate the impact. You want to be able to evaluate if these funds helped to make things better or if they created a barrier or a roadblock. And you also want to be able to determine if the staffing pattern is something that meets the need, if the staffing fit is helping you to move along or becoming a hindrance. Grant management is where, for me, the rubber meets the road, and you're able to say that you've received an award, you've articulated all components, and that you were able to execute. These are my lessons learned, the things that I have found to be helpful and important. I've been managing grants for over 25 years. And in that time, I've written many grants. I've been awarded. The team has been awarded because it's been very rare that it was just me writing something because of all those components. Was I able to see us manifest this item after reading what it could do? Yes, but I believe that the team is actually what helps us to get to the place to where we have a successful grant, that we have an award, and at the end we've made an impact. We haven't squandered any funds. We have individuals that are better off because of it. And so that would be what I believe would help you in basic grant writing. And at this point, I open the floor for any questions, any comments.
So we do have some questions. First of all, where have you been? I needed you about 25 years ago. I remember in my first full-time appointment, we applied for a Board of Child Care grant and got it. And then
And
after
didn't know
that,
what to do.
then all of the things you've raised tonight, I needed to know that 25 years ago. So here's some questions that have come in. So
Sure.
first one is, you had mentioned about, making sure you had all the details, and if you were not awarded a grant, correcting the things that may have been obstacles on your first pass through. So how
Yes.
often does the grantor tell somebody what they did wrong or what areas they should concentrate on to reapply? Is that a normal practice?
It really depends on the grantor. Some of the more sophisticated, and I mean no disrespect by that, but those that have been at it a while and have some systems in place, they usually have a scoring rubric. And so in the scoring rubric, their scorers typically write notes. And so what you can do is, after you have not been awarded, you can ask, is there any information that you can share from the reviewers that can help me in a future rewrite?
So as you said earlier, just ask.
Yeah, just ask. And many times that's, we don't think to ask, just ask.
What's, as my dad said, ask for everything. The worst thing they can do is say no.
That's right. That's right. And the worst they can do is give you an answer. You make it better, and then you win the award the next time.
All right. Somebody else asked about the sustainability, and like many grantors want you to explain the sustainability. And so to be transparent, I work with a team here on the annual conference that does grants, and that is a huge thing, is how is it going to be sustainable? I would say, I guess the question I would ask based on their statement is how much detail should you be giving under the sustainability question?
So that also depends on the grantor, and I say that because it's really true. There are some grantors that when they talk about sustainability, they want you to go from, 3 years of being funded to that 4th year, that you should have created an infrastructure around those years to where you can go full force. Then there may be someone else that says this was more of a seed money type situation. And so then you're going to begin to build on the foundation that you were able to establish. So it really does depend on the grantor. But what I always share when I'm asked, because, I'm sharing knowledge, do not ever get a grant that you need to sustain and never have that conversation with the stakeholders. Just don't do that, because it's, for me, it's heartbreaking when there's served and then we didn't think of some way to sustain something. Even if it's that you're going to now collaborate with one of those community partners, and that maybe you'll share in some of the expenses, but you have to at least give it thought.
And I would add, and you please correct me if I'm wrong, to be realistic about your sustainability model.
Yes.
I've read sub grants that ask for $50,000, and in 1 year they're going to attract so many people that it's going to pay for itself, and we know that that's not always a realistic assumption.
Right. Please, I think I have that somewhere. Be realistic. Yes.
Yeah.
And sometimes it means that you need a different set of sounding board. Okay, so you have a group of individuals that are in this with you, that you need a reasonable voice. You need some check with something better. And I think that that's healthy. That's healthy because then you're being challenged. Your thoughts are being challenged. And that's a good thing, especially when you think about it. Just think about yourself. When you give someone money and they don't do what they said they were going to do with it, how do you feel?
Exactly. A couple more questions. You've really,
Sure.
you've gotten the thoughts going in our participants. They've got some great questions. Do
Okay.
you have any recommendations for easy to use project management software that's also economical?
Those two words together typically don't go. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news. Usually if it's reasonable, then it's not very robust. I personally have not, but what I can do is ask around and see if there is anything. When all else fails, creating a spreadsheet will work. And usually, honestly, if the grantor has something, they'll share it with you. So you can always ask them as well if they have something that they could suggest.
If I can ask, you don't have to answer, what project management tool do you use at the community college?
We actually use, well, for the larger grants, we use a software tracking called Bloomin, and it's a third-party program with the Department of Education.
Okay. I know for project management, we use Basecamp with the annual conference.
Yeah, I've heard of Basecamp. I've just never used it.
So someone else asked, are there keywords or phrases that grantors are looking for?
Yes, I believe that I can say yes. Now, what they are, the community-based, usually local-based grants really want to see what it is that they put in that call for proposals or the document that they created to put out there to the general public that these funds were available. I believe that many times we miss the mark when we don't pay attention to what was part of the announcement. So if they put it in the announcement, they want to see it in the proposal. I think that's probably the best advice I can give you. If they put it in the announcement, they want to see it in the proposal. It's really difficult to award someone when they tell you exactly what they're looking for and you don't put that in what you provide to them.
Well, I think you had said it earlier, to do your homework and your research, to look into the organization and see what words and phrases they use on their website,
Yes.
what they use in the grant requests. So
yes, all of that.
Couple of budget questions. So what are the components of a typical budget that you would include with the grant, or is it just so specific to each grant?
Well, some grants don't allow for staff, so then they wouldn't have staff. But if a grant allows for staff, do you have to include fringes? Do you have to include what you have to send to the state and the IRS, because of, what those fringe benefits represent? Unemployment. Okay, I can't think of the others, but those things that are typically there because you have employees.
Right.
So if you're not going to have an employee, then you don't have to worry about that. But you may have to include what the product costs. Is there a maintenance or a license or anything that has to be maintained because you have this service or this item? Will they allow for you to pay for something that has a life expectancy? So, computers don't last forever. Are they going to allow that? Is that allowable expense? So you want to make sure you know what the allowable expenses are. And once you know what the allowable expenses are, then you can build a budget. So subscriptions and memberships, that could be a part of it because of the type of grant you have.
Okay.
Supplies and materials because of the type of grant you have. Contractual services. Do you have to hire a consultant? Do you have to get someone out to do some training? Any of those things. So it will be specific to the grant, but there are also some components that remain consistent.
Now, in line with the budget question, one of our participants has been looking at some grants, and the grantors require information on the church's budget and viability. Is that normal?
That is normal. That is normal. That's back to that sustainability, and a term that I don't like, but you have to deal with the reality of it. They're planting. You know, are these funds coming in to do something that you already should have been doing?
Okay.
And that's called supplanting. That's when, you know, you're taking someone else's money to do something that you should have been doing anyway. So these things, these nuances, especially in these times where funds are limited and that people are in need, they can put restrictions on the funds. And that's back to doing your homework, making sure that you research out what it is that they're expecting and what it is that they need from you.
Okay. One of our participants is asking if you could explain a little bit more about the executive summary.
So a part of the proposal for the grant will give you the components. And typically an executive summary will provide them with an overview of how you will use the funds, how it aligns with your mission and your vision, and how it will also enhance their persona in the community. So it just kind of encapsulates all of those major pieces into a succinct summary.
I have read through a number of grant proposals, and after even reading the whole thing, still didn't know what they were going to do. And so, I mean, I'm beginning to think about how we restructure our grants. How nice it would be just to have a one page, here is what we want to do, and here's what we're asking of you. So
yeah.
I'm glad we asked you to do this. Is it one of our participants asked if it's advisable to apply for multiple grants for the same project? And if you receive excess, then what do you do? So they're thinking of capital projects, but should you apply for multiple grants?
So as long as you follow the guidelines for the grant, sure, you can apply for multiple grants. Now, if you are applying for multiple grants and you can't manage multiple grants, that's a problem. Because you don't want to have multiple grants and then you can't manage them. Because then you're not going to have an impact. You're not going to be able to assess the need and meet it. And it just becomes a snowball effect of what I will assume will become negativity.
Okay.
So you want to make sure that if the multiple grants can be used, sure. If you can manage them, sure. But do not take more than you can handle and then not do well.
So, but what if, let's say you're asking for $50,000, that's your budget for the project, and you apply to 5 granting agencies and they all award you from some miracle and they offer you a total of $75,000.
So
what would you do then?
You can actually, well, the reality is that somewhere in that $75,000, you've told them exactly what you're going to do with the funds. So go do it. So
okay.
maybe that means, and this is I'm just making this up.
Okay.
Maybe that means that you were going to help 20 single mothers to get daycare, and maybe you can now do 25.
And we have some of the sharpest participants, and somebody also pointed out that some grants do ask if you've applied to other agencies.
They
as
do.
well.
That is true too. They do.
So we have a couple of people who they're brand new to grant writing.
Okay.
And when I say brand new, they've never written a grant ever. So one is asking if you know of any resources of grant writers who will assist someone who needs assistance.
I do not know of a pool of individuals, but I will tell you that some of I'm an educator. So some of our greatest resources are graduate students.
So you may have somebody in your congregation that you don't know of who is able to do this.
This is true. This is true. Yes, Maryland Nonprofit is a wonderful resource. I'm a member of Maryland Nonprofit. They have seminars, they have workshops, they have wonderful resources. And some of the, there's a national nonprofit group as well that does the same thing.
Okay. So here's another person, they've never written a grant before, and they've picked up your idea of putting together a team. So what should they look for in team members?
Okay, so you want someone that's good with numbers because of that budget. You want someone that writes well, so that you can at least have someone checking over the final draft. You want someone who thinks critically, because many times the logic for grant writing is not the way we would write a memo or an email or an evaluation. It's technical. So critical technical writing, if they've done any of that, they usually will be helpful. And you want someone that has a passion for what it is that you're about to do, because they will pull you up and help you stay focused on the mission at hand.
And I have to agree with you, having somebody who can write well, because here you are, you're making your case on paper.
Yes.
And that's different than if you're in the room with or even in the room or on the Zoom.
On the Zoom, it's totally different.
Totally different.
Totally different.
Just because the way questions come in, what's the going rate for a grant writer?
I honestly do not know.
Those are my favorite answers.
I don't know because I have a team.
Right.
Yeah.
So some other questions. If a grant is awarded, is there a time limit to spend the funds and or use the funds? This is multiple parts. So that's the first question. Is there a time limit for use of the funds?
Yes, that is going to be a part of that cycle that I keep referring to. So you'll have 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and that will be something that you'll know from the announcement. And then with the award, they will tell you. Now, there is this thing called a no-cost extension. And so sometimes because the grantor wants the funds spent, they believed in your vision, they believed in the purpose for the grant, they will allow you to write for a no-cost extension. That means they're not putting out any additional money, but they're going to give you additional time.
Okay.
And so that is called a no-cost extension.
Do any grants that you know of deal with or offer funds for a new staff position?
There are some that may use that as a one-time occurrence, but you then have to be able to tell them how you sustain it. So many times, I would say that's probably least likely because of the sustainability piece. I do
a few of our grants that we give through our United Funding Task Force with the annual conference have been used for staffing positions. But again, you're absolutely right. They have to show that after the grant is exhausted, how are you going to maintain that position?
Yeah.
Couple more questions. Do grantors sometimes require you to file for IRS 501c3 status? So I'm going to ask this question differently though, because For our churches, you may or may not know this, but because you're a United Methodist Church, you have a 501c3 status. We call that an umbrella coverage. It's done through our General Counsel on Finance and Administration, and you can find information about that on the conference website. But how about for churches, for grantors that will not give to a faith-based organization? Should you set up a separate 501c3 in order to get grants?
So what I would suggest, because creating a 501c3 is another workshop.
Yes, absolutely.
It is no joke.
That's a 3-day thing.
No joke. It is no joke. I've done 2. It's no joke. What I would suggest is that you find a partner.
Excellent.
That you find someone who may already have that status and that you can partner with. I am not saying that you should not go for a 501c3, but I'm serious when I say that that is a process. And so you would want to do your homework, whether it's really beneficial to have the 501c3 for this new entity, or whether you can find a partner, that there's someone who already has a like mission, vision, and would not mind partnering.
Well, I know I say it often, but my colleague, Dr. Smothers, has taught me well, and he always asks the question, who will do this with me? And I think we can say that in terms of the projects we want to do. Grantors like to see that there are multiple stakeholders at the table.
Yes, agreed.
Somebody else is asking, can we submit an unsolicited grant application? Are there organizations that fund activities that request for funding has not been issued? So you had mentioned requests going out, but are there organizations that you can just just send in a grant request?
Yes and no. And I say yes and no because if you go back to the beginning, grantors give money for a specific purpose. And so if you're not meeting that purpose and it's unsolicited, then it may be time wasted. What I would suggest is that you inquire with that organization if they plan to have ever would consider doing whatever it is you need. Now, we are all accustomed to unsolicited for donations of food or gift cards or a gas card from your local grocery or your local, organization. Those things work well. But when you're talking about, $30, $40, $50,000, that's a little harder sell.
Let's see. Somebody else is asking, what is a fiscal agent and how do you find one?
So the fiscal agent is typically that financial officer that is going to help you usher that budget from point A to point Z. Some grants ask for you to tell them who that person is and to provide their background, resume, bio. It really depends on the amount of money that you're talking about. Some of the grants that I've written and administer, because there's such a large amount of money, I have to provide background on multiple people.
Right. I think what I'm hearing you say is be able to document.
Yeah, data, document.
Excellent.
Those would be my, yeah.
I'll tell you what, we have gotten through all of the questions that have come up in the Q&A. Is there anything you would want to add for the benefit of our participants tonight?
I would say that grants are a wonderful thing, but just so that you keep a positive perspective, make sure that you do your homework. Because if you don't do your homework and then you apply for something that you really are not prepared to receive, it can be become unwielding. It can be disappointing. But we have to be able to put out first what is needed so that we can then have the benefit to be able to help others.
Wonderful. And of course, I always say we've gotten through all the questions and someone gets one
Of
in,
course, of
and that's
course.
all right. So
It's
what
all
is
good.
your advice on grantors who want to use their logo in your publications?
Well, they're funding it. So those, when I say do your homework, these are other things that I'm talking about. Do you always see a logo around town and wonder why? Well, it's probably because that's a part of their requirement as the funder. Is that they want, and some will even have a statement that goes with it. I have some grantors that not only do they want their logo, but there's a statement. They want it stated that they are the funding source and for how long they will fund this.
Okay.
But that's a part of what is the saying, you pay to play?
Well, and they're also trying to promote themselves and their work.
Definitely, because that's goodwill in the community. Most definitely. It's goodwill, and they're actually taking they're taking on something that is helping, and so they would want to be able to be noticed as doing that great work as well.
Another good question just came through. Do organizations give sample grant applications out? Can you ask for a sample grant, so give you an idea of what you could do with it?
I have not seen that, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But I have not seen that.
Let me approach it from a little bit different angle.
Sure.
Do grantors ever list who they've awarded grants to?
Yes, and that's part of that homework. I know for me, there are some listservs for individuals that have these grants. And so, yes, we've gone out and said, hey, they give points for this and points for that. How did you go about that? And so colleague to colleague, yes, we've been able to help each other.
So then if you do your homework and you go through and you see, oh, they funded 10 churches before, you might use that opportunity to reach out to those churches, find out what they did well because they got the money.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Back to doing homework.
Yes, but I mean, and how did I put that? It's time consuming. And if you do it well, you have to do your homework.
And pardon the pun, but it can pay off.
Yeah, it can. It can pay off.
Oh, I'm just gonna answer that privately. Okay. Scheherazade, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You have given us a lot to chew on, a lot to think about, a lot of homework to do. Thank you for taking time away from your family to be with us.
Oh, you're welcome. Excuse my backdrop, but this is the only way that you all weren't going to have family time too.
I am so grateful. For those who are with us tonight, before we leave, I just want to give you a little bit of update. Our next Training Tuesday is going to be on Tuesday, May 18th. I will tell you, you don't want to miss it. I'm putting the information in the chat for how you can register. We're going to be joined by the Reverend Dr. Marvin McMickle. That name should sound familiar to those of you in our annual conference. He led our Bible study at one of our annual conferences. He also was our keynote speaker at one of our Recall Summits. Dr. McMickle has a new book that's coming out entitled Let the Oppressed Go Free, Exploring Theologies of Liberation. He is joining us on May 18th. We'll also be joined by our Bishop Easterling, who will help in a dialogue with Dr. McMickle. So it's going to be a very informative evening, well worth your time. So please take some time to register for that. I'm going to close us out in prayer, but before I do, one thing I like to do for you, Dr. Forman, is I'm going to open the chat. People can't applaud because you can't see them. So I'm going to open the chat. If everyone could give their words of thanks to Dr. Forman for taking time to be with us tonight, you can put your words of thanks in the chat. She can read them as we are preparing to close out. A couple of comments people have made. It's important to know the grantor. Somebody else has stated that the Foundation Library that used to be located on K Street, Northwest DC, had samples of grants to read. And we just have lots of thank yous. Thank you, thank you.
You all are quite welcome. One of the things I've learned in life is that we don't know things to keep it to ourselves. We should share. And so I am grateful for the opportunity to share.
Wonderful. So everyone, thank you for joining us tonight. May you go forth with God's blessing and have a wonderful rest of your evening. Enjoy your family time, Dr. Forman, and we will see you sometime when you get back. Take care, everyone.
All righty. Thank you.